HOA claimed my water was federal property. It wasn't. The HOA called 911 on me at my own lake, yelling that I was trespassing on water my family's owned for generations. I didn't argue. I let them dig their hole, because they had no clue the man they were threatening was the senator who helped write the anti-HOA law. Drop a yes if you've ever stood your ground, and hit subscribe to follow the next fight for real land justice. The first light of morning slid across Clearwater Lake like a slow breath, turning the surface into a sheet of silver glass. I stood on my old pine dock with a mug of coffee warming my hands, listening to the soft creak of wood beneath my boots and the distant hoot of a lone owl heading home. This lake had been my uncle's pride for 40 years, and now it was mine. 90 acres of water so clear you could see trout drifting like ghosts beneath the surface. Most mornings out here started the same way. Quiet, steady, a kind of peace city folks don't believe exists anymore. I'd left engineering behind to finally breathe again, to let the worries of deadlines and office politics dissolve into the ripples of lake water. But peace, like morning fog, can vanish quick. The crunch of gravel on the shoreline snapped through the stillness. I didn't even have time to set down my mug before a sharp voice split the air. "Stop right there! You're trespassing on federal wildlife sanctuary water." Her voice had the pitch of somebody who'd never been ignored a day in her life. I turned slowly. HOA President Marla Kensington, blonde bob stiff as lacquer, fuchsia pantsuit loud enough to scare fish for a mile, was marching down the slope toward my dock, with 2 HOA volunteers flanking her, like she ran a militia instead of a lakeside community. Each carried a thick binder stamped with labels like environmental protection and federal restrictions, all printed in fonts that tried too hard to look official. Marla's heels stabbed into the ground with each step. "I am ordering you to step away from this dock while I contact the authorities." I blinked once, took a sip of cooling coffee, and let the steam hit the early chill. "Morning to you too, Marla." She whipped out her phone so fast the sunlight flashed off the case. "Dispatch? I need immediate response units at Clearwater Lake." "Yes, trespasser. Violating sanctuary water. Possible environmental crime." I exhaled slowly. That peaceful dawn was gone now. The 2 volunteers, Ron with the nervous mustache and Lena with her lips pressed thin enough to disappear, lifted their binders like they were presenting evidence in a court they'd invented themselves. Ron cleared his throat. "Ma'am, per subsection 12 of federal wetland regulations, you cannot occupy or manipulate restricted water zones without clearance." "Restricted water zones?" I echoed. "Ron, that's my dock, and this is my lake." Marla shot a glare sharp enough to cut rope. "This lake has been reclassified. You clearly haven't read the notices." "There were no notices," I said simply. She talked right over me. "Ignorance is not a defense, Mr. Caldwell." A distant rumble of an engine rolled over the hills. Slow, steady, familiar. The county sheriff's truck, making its way down the narrow access road. Sunlight glinted off the windshield in flashes. Marla folded her arms with the smugness of a cat who just pushed your glass off the counter. "Good. They're here. We can settle this immediately." I set my mug on the dock post and wiped a thumb across the rim. My uncle used to say, "Don't talk when someone wants a reaction. Silence is its own kind of power." So I kept my mouth shut, watching dust rise behind the sheriff's tires as he crept closer. Marla pointed a rigid finger at me. "You see, officers will confirm that this lake was designated as a wildlife sanctuary last month. Your presence here is a direct violation of federal code and trespassing." I met her stare, unblinking. "Marla, how do you trespass on something you own?" Her smile tightened, faltered for just half a breath. "We'll see about that." The sheriff's truck slowed to a stop at the edge of the clearing, engine ticking softly as it cooled. The driver's door opened, and the silhouette of Deputy Harlan stepped out, hat brim low, shoulders stiff, clearly wondering why the sunrise had to be interrupted by someone yelling about federal crimes before breakfast. I stayed still on my dock, hands in my pockets, the lake lapping gently at the posts. A thin mist drifted across the water like the world was holding its breath. Why had Marla called the cops on the man who owned the lake? I had a feeling I was about to find out. Deputy Harlan stepped out of his truck with the weary posture of a man who'd already had enough of the day, even though the sun had barely cleared the tree line. He adjusted his hat, scanned the shoreline, then looked at me standing on my own dock like I was a teenager caught sneaking into a neighbor's pool. "Mornin', Ethan," he called, voice steady, gravelly. "Mornin', Harlan." Before he could say another word, Marla barreled toward him, binder raised like she was delivering a sacred text. "Officer, thank goodness. This man," she thrust her hand at me, "is violating federal wildlife sanctuary protections and refusing to vacate restricted waters." She said it loud enough for the squirrels to file complaints. Harlan blinked once, twice. "Sanctuary?" He scratched his cheek. "Ma'am, this here's private property." "Was private property," she snapped. "As of last month, Clearwater Lake was reclassified under the Environmental Preservation Act. I have documents right here." Ron and Lena rushed forward, stacking binders into her hands like stage assistants feeding props to an actress mid-performance. She flipped them open, pages fluttering in the morning breeze. Seals, stamps, long paragraphs of legal jargon printed in bold letters. Harlan took one of the pages, squinted. "EPA, Section 4B, Federal Wetland," he stopped, brow furrowing. "This is mighty new. Why hasn't the county been notified?" Marla's smile tightened. "This region falls under federal jurisdiction now. Notifications are issued directly through the HOA Environmental Subcommittee." She placed a hand over her heart, as if she were the subcommittee itself. I stepped off the dock, boots thudding softly against the weathered planks. "Harlan, those documents aren't federal. They're printed off some website she probably made last night." Marla turned on me like a rattlesnake. "You have no authority to question EPA documentation. And you," I said calmly, "have no authority to invent it." Her nostrils flared. "Ignorance doesn't excuse violations, Mr. Caldwell. Whether or not you understood the transition to sanctuary status, your actions this morning constitute a direct breach." Harlan turned between us, looking like a man caught in a tug-of-war between reality and whatever universe Marla lived in. "Look, Marla, when exactly was this lake reclassified?" 34 days ago, she recited, following a preliminary habitat assessment. "That's funny," a voice called from the tree line. "Pretty sure no one came out here doing assessments except the raccoons." Old Ray Johnson, retired fishing guide and unofficial lake historian, walked through the brush carrying 2 thermoses and an expression that said he'd rather deal with a broken engine block than an angry HOA president. He handed me 1 thermos with a nod. Ray planted himself beside us, arms crossed. "Ethan, you ain't the first." She pulled the same stunt on the Hendersons, and the Matsons before them. Marla's voice sharpened like cold metal. "Raymond, your involvement is neither requested nor required." Ray ignored her. Funny thing about those 2 families, both sold their lake parcels right after Marla started waving those books around. "That was their decision," she barked. "They didn't want federal trouble." Ray's eyes hardened. They didn't want to be steamrolled. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of wet pine and lake mist. Even the birds quieted, as if sensing the tension breaking over the water. Harlan cleared his throat. "Marla, if the lake is federally protected, I need to see county filings, state notices, anything verifying this." She pushed the binder toward him again. "These are certified." I stepped closer, plucked a page from the binder before she could yank it back. The paper trembled in my hand from her grip. Harlan, look at this seal. A glossy blue stamp sat in the corner, an eagle perched over a globe. The EPA doesn't use this seal, I said. That's the Department of Transportation's emblem from a decade ago. Ray snorted. Guess she mixed up her fake stamps. Marla's jaw clenched, but she didn't grab the paperback. She didn't dare. She straightened her jacket. Mr. Caldwell, you have 30 minutes to vacate this dock before the next level of enforcement is involved. Next level? Ray echoed. She smiled. Federal compliance agents. A chill slid down my spine, not because I believed her, but because I finally understood what she'd been building. This wasn't about protecting wetlands. This wasn't about fish or habitat or sanctuary status. This was a setup, a coordinated one, and she'd done it before. I folded the paper, handed it to Harlan. Deputy, I inherited this lake. Deeds clean, no restrictions, no easements, and no federal sanctuary has ever been filed with the EPA. You can check your system. I will, he said, voice firmer now. Marla's face twitched, the first crack in her flawless mask. You'll regret challenging this, she hissed. People who resisted before learned quickly what happens when they defy federal protections. Ray leaned closer to me. She's trying to scare you same as the others. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the lake bright gold. Behind Marla, her volunteers hovered like anxious shadows, glancing around as if hoping some real federal agent would descend from the sky to validate their binders. But no one came, because none of it was real. I looked at Harlan, then at Marla. I'm not leaving my own lake. Her lips pulled tight. Then we'll escalate. She spun on her heels and marched toward her SUV, binder clutched like a weapon. Ron and Lena followed, their binders pressed to their chests. Tires kicked up a cloud of dust as she sped off. Ray sighed beside me. This ain't over. No, I said, watching the dust trail disappear down the road. It's just beginning. Harlan walked back to his truck, documents still in hand. Ethan, I'm going to look into this. Something feels off. It is, I replied. He paused, thumb tapping his radio. Be careful. People don't go to this much effort unless they want something real bad. I nodded, and for the first time that morning I realized he was right. What exactly was Marla trying to take from me? The day warmed slow and steady, but the knot in my chest tightened as hours passed. By late afternoon, the lake had settled into its usual summer hush, dragonflies stitching the air, sunlight sliding across the water like brushed gold. But there was something else in the air too, a tension rippling underneath the calm surface. Ray had gone home, promising to keep an eye on things. I didn't ask what he meant. Old-timers like him had ways of watching a place without ever stepping foot near it. I was sanding a railing on the dock when I heard engines, multiple, low, and purposeful. I set down the sander and wiped the sawdust from my hands. A line of SUVs rolled up my gravel driveway, dust billowing like a small storm behind them. The first SUV slammed to a stop, then another, and another, 4 in total. The lead vehicle door opened, and out stepped Marla Kensington. But this time, she wasn't wearing her HOA blazer. She wore a tan uniform that looked vaguely governmental. Wrong buttons, wrong badge, wrong everything, but official enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. Behind her, half a dozen men and women in matching outfits poured out. They carried metal stakes, warning signs, clipboards, and measuring tools. To someone watching from afar, it might have looked like a legitimate federal team arriving for a site evaluation. It wasn't. But the theater was impressive. Ray would have called it a good show. Marla strutted forward, sunglasses reflecting the water. Mr. Caldwell, per federal code, subsection 9 of the Wetlands Protection Act, we are here to conduct boundary confirmation and territory assignment. Boundary what? I asked. She gestured sharply, and her team fanned out like they'd rehearsed this. Metal stakes hit the ground with hollow thuds. Bright orange tape unrolled, slashing through my shoreline like a construction zone. Warning signs went up. Federal wetlands. No entry, environmental seizure pending, authorized personnel. Only one sign even had a fake barcode sticker slapped on the corner, the kind you buy from prank catalogs. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "this is still private property." "Not anymore," Marla replied. "Your lake borders have been adjusted." "By who?" She smiled as if the question bored her. "The HOA Environmental Subcommittee, acting under provisional federal authority." "That's not a thing," I replied. "It is," she snapped, "and your refusal to acknowledge it is only adding to the list of violations." I took a slow breath, felt the heat rising at the back of my neck. "Marla, you're staking federal boundaries on my land." "We are affirming protected habitat zones," she corrected, waving her clipboard like a gavel, "and marking off areas where civilian presence is prohibited." One of her volunteers, a tall man with a clipboard too big for his confidence, read aloud, "Per environmental protocol, high-traffic areas must be restricted for the protection of sensitive species." I raised an eyebrow. "What species?" He froze, eyes darting toward Marla. She didn't miss a beat. "Migratory, lake fowl." "Which ones?" I asked. She cleared her throat. "The speckled, ridge-beaked heron." Ray's voice echoed from somewhere in my memory. "She don't even know which end of a fishing pole is up." I exhaled sharply through my nose. "There's no such bird, Marla," she waved dismissively. "You're not a biologist." "No," I said, "but I do know the difference between a real environmental regulation and something typed in a rush last night." She stepped forward until she was standing only a foot from me. "Mr. Caldwell, you can cooperate and step away from the protected shoreline, or I can escalate this to federal enforcement." "You mean the sheriff?" I asked. She smiled sharply. "No, higher." Her team hammered another stake. The metallic clang reverberated across the lake. Birds scattered from nearby branches. She unfolded a large map, an aerial view of Clearwater Lake, and I immediately spotted the glaring errors. New lines drawn in thick red marker, boundaries that stretched beyond the water into parts of my forest, and a bold area labeled Federal Habitat Zone. Under HOA Provisional Control, HOA Control. Over federal habitat. Over my lake. Ridiculous, yet dangerous. Because lies travel faster than truth, especially when stamped in fake blue ink. I took a step back, studying the chaos as it unfolded. The new boundary line now cut directly across the lower edge of my dock. One of the volunteers planted a sign right at the edge. "Trespassing on protected water. Maximum penalty." "What's the penalty?" I asked. The volunteer blinked. "We haven't printed that page yet." Marla snapped her fingers. "Keep working." Another SUV door slammed, and one of the uniformed volunteers carried a roll of red tape toward my cabin. He stretched it across the front steps, as if sealing off a crime scene. "Hey!" I raised my voice. "Do not touch my home." Marla turned slowly. "Your cabin sits partially within a restricted watershed corridor. Until environmental assessment is complete, you cannot occupy it." "You're locking me out of my own house?" She smiled. "Temporarily." The wind carried the bitter scent of stirred dust and pine sap. My property, my uncle's legacy, was being carved up by people who had no authority, no right, and no shame. I clenched my jaw, breathed in deep, and walked past Marla toward the cabin. The volunteer lifted the tape, unsure whether to stop me. I stepped through it and into the cabin, ignoring the startled gasps behind me. Inside, sunlight filtered through lace curtains, illuminating dust motes drifting like tiny stars. I walked straight to the old oak desk in the corner, my uncle's desk, scarred from years of maps, pens, tools, and coffee mugs. I unlocked the bottom drawer, Inside was a steel briefcase, matte black, heavy. My fingers brushed over the combination dial. 3 numbers only I knew. I spun the dial, hearing the soft clicks. Outside, Marla shouted something, but her voice blurred like distant thunder. The briefcase opened with a soft hiss. Inside were the documents no one knew I had. The ones that didn't just prove I owned the lake. The ones that proved I was someone Marla should never have tried to push. I closed the case, latching it shut, and carried it under my arm as I stepped back outside. Marla stood waiting, impatience painted across her face. "What is that?" she demanded. "Something," I said quietly, "that's going to end all of this." She scoffed. "You think some paperwork will save you?" I walked past her toward the dock, the briefcase heavy at my side. "Not paperwork," I said. "Proof." The wind stilled for a moment, lake water smoothing to glass. Ray's warning rang through my mind. She's trying to scare you, same as the others. But she was about to learn she'd picked the wrong man and the wrong lake. What exactly was Marla trying to take? Everything she thought she could. But she had no idea what I was about to take back. By the next morning, Clearwater Lake had changed. Not in appearance, but in atmosphere. A thin veil of fog clung to the surface, drifting low and quiet, like the lake itself was bracing for something it sensed before I did. Sunlight filtered through tall pines in soft shafts, hitting the water in trembling reflections. It should have been peaceful, but peace doesn't survive long when someone plans to steal your land. I stepped onto the dock with the briefcase still in hand, feeling the damp boards flex under my boots. Ray had promised he'd stop by first thing, but he wasn't there yet. Instead, the lake gave me only silence, at first. Then I heard the rumble. An engine growled from the ridge above my cabin, a slow, heavy sound, like something bigger than an SUV. I climbed the path to the clearing and nearly laughed at the sight. Marla hadn't come alone this time. She'd brought a caravan. 3 pearl-white Range Rovers idled along the tree line, their chrome grills catching the morning sun. A black pickup with tinted windows trailed behind them. And flanking the group was a moving truck plastered with a sign that read, "Crystal Preserve Environmental Analysis Unit." The words looked official, but the vinyl sticker was peeling at the corners. Out stepped Marla Kensington in full performance mode, navy suit jacket, fake ID clipped to the lapel, sunglasses that cost more than my chainsaw. Behind her came a man I'd never seen before, tall, polished, wearing the kind of confidence you only get from thinking everyone else in the room is beneath you. Ray arrived at that exact moment, stepping out from behind the brush. His voice dropped low. "That's her husband, Thomas Kensington." I nodded slowly. "Lawyer?" Ray snorted. "Was, not anymore." Thomas walked toward me, briefcase in hand, matching mine in size but not in weight, not in truth. He extended a hand, smiling like a man offering condolences to someone not yet dead. "Mr. Caldwell, Thomas Kensington, I'm here on behalf of the HOA's Environmental Legal Division." "Which doesn't exist," Ray muttered. Thomas's smile didn't falter. "You're obstructing a federal sanctuary assessment. That puts you in violation of Title 4B of the Environmental Protection Framework." I raised an eyebrow. "That framework doesn't exist either." He blinked once, just once, then shifted his stance to hide the crack. "Perhaps you aren't familiar with newly adopted guidelines." "I'm familiar with every one of them," I said, stepping closer. "Because for the last decade of my career, I helped write revisions to the very laws you're pretending to cite." Marla stiffened. Thomas's jaw tightened. Ray whispered under his breath, "Oh, they didn't see that coming." Thomas cleared his throat, shifting gears. "Be that as it may, we've completed a preliminary review of the lake's environmental condition." Ray chuckled. "You did that from a moving truck?" Thomas ignored him and pulled out a stack of documents. Every page bore watermarks, seals, and signatures that looked credible at first glance, but only at first. "Here," he said. "You'll want to review these." I flipped through the pages, my eyes tracing each manufactured detail. Phrases like critical habitat designation, irreplaceable ecosystem integrity, and federal protection ordinance. All buzzwords, all hollow. But tucked behind page 7 was the real bomb. A map, an aerial map of Clearwater Lake and every property surrounding it, each section marked with color-coded zones. The red zone covered my entire shoreline, my dock, my cabin, and half the forest behind it. Ray pointed at the map. "What's that supposed to mean?" Thomas answered smoothly. "These sections fall under mandatory acquisition for environmental containment. Owners will be compensated at fair market value." "Fair market since when?" Ray asked. "Since last quarter's appraisal adjustments," Thomas said. "And who adjusted them?" Ray pressed. Marla answered this time. "Crystal Preserve Holdings?" Ray laughed again. "Your holding company?" "It's federally aligned," she snapped. "With who?" Ray asked. Neither answered. I finally spoke. "So that's the play. You declare the lake a sanctuary. You forge the documents. You scare people with threats of federal prosecution. And then Crystal Preserve buys up the land for pennies." Thomas's smile thinned. "We don't force anyone to sell." Ray pointed at the red zones. "Looks mighty forced to me." Thomas shifted his shoulders. The Henderson family agreed to sell voluntarily once they understood the severity of their violations. "And the Matsons?" Ray said. "And the Caldwells?" I added quietly. Silence rolled through the trees like a cold wind. Thomas closed his briefcase. "We can resolve this quickly if you cooperate. Sell your parcel and avoid further investigation. The longer you resist, the more complicated this becomes." My blood warmed, slow and steady. "You don't want complicated," I said. "Complicated involves real agencies, real oversight, real authority." Marla scoffed. "You think you're above oversight? You will comply with this assessment or face formal charges." Ray stepped in front of me. "He ain't facing charges for stepping on his own dock." Marla pointed sharply at the lake. "You don't understand, Ray. This lake is critical, rare, valuable, the kind of land the federal government would seize if they knew its worth." Ray frowned. "Worth? What worth?" Thomas shot her a look, sharp, warning, but she didn't stop. "The water quality ratings on this lake exceed natural baselines by over 40%. No lake in the region tests this clean anymore. It's irreplaceable real estate." Her eyes flicked to me, and we want it. She realized too late that she'd said the quiet part out loud. Thomas inhaled sharply, closing his eyes as if counting to 10. "What my wife means is—" "I know exactly what she means," I said. The fog over the lake lifted then, almost theatrically, revealing the glass-smooth water stretching across the basin. My uncle's lake. My family's lake. They wanted it because they thought it was undefended. They thought I was alone out here. They thought I was just a retired engineer with no one to call and nothing to fight with but old paperwork. They were wrong. I held up my briefcase and the morning sun glinted off the metal. "You two have no idea what you're up against." Marla smirked. "We've beaten everyone before you." I stepped closer. "None of them had what I have." Thomas frowned. "And what exactly do you have, Mr. Caldwell?" I looked between them, feeling the calm settle over me again, like the lake before a storm. "Evidence," I said softly, "and the law." Their expressions wavered. For the first time since they'd arrived, they looked uncertain. I turned toward the lake, letting the breeze brush past my shoulders. Why were they desperate for this lake? Because they thought it would be easy. But nothing about what was coming next would be easy. For them. Not when they realized who they were really dealing with. and not when I revealed why this lake had always been worth fighting for. By evening, their caravan had retreated, leaving behind a scatter of orange stakes, crumpled tape, and signs half tilted in the soil like the remnants of a messy parade. The sun dropped behind the tree line, painting the sky in long strokes of copper and violet. Clearwater Lake turned dark and still, its surface so smooth it looked like polished obsidian. But underneath the quiet, something else churned. Not the water. Me. The weight of the briefcase sat on the wooden table inside my cabin, reflecting the glow of the single lamp I'd switched on. I'd opened it earlier and taken out the documents inside, the ones stamped, sealed, verified, then laid them across the desk like a map of my past and my future. They weren't weapons in the traditional sense, but they were enough to end everything Marla and Thomas had just started. I stood at the window for a long time, watching fog curl back over the water. My uncle's old wind chimes rattled softly from the porch beam, each clang a hollow echo through the cooling air. Night fell slow out here, like the dark had manners. A knock came at the door, 2 taps, a pause, then one more. Ray. I opened the door to find him with his flannel jacket half-zipped, hat pulled low. He smelled faintly of campfire smoke and river mud. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. "Anytime." He stepped inside and glanced around, eyes landing on the open documents. "Looks like you're planning something." "Trying to stay ahead," I said. Ray let out a breath and rubbed the back of his neck. "Ethan, those folks ain't playing. They've been running this scam a while. Henderson's just wanted peace. Matson's had family troubles. Caldwell's, they got bullied out." I sank into a chair. "They told you that?" He nodded. "Before they left. Said the HOA kept bringing fake inspectors, fake fines, fake warnings, threatened federal prosecution. Folks hear words like that and freeze. They couldn't handle it." I stared at the lake through the window. Mist thickened, turning the shoreline into a ghostly veil, and now they think they can do the same to me. "No," Ray corrected, stepping closer. "They think you're easier." "Why easier?" He hesitated. "Because you came here alone. No family, no wife, no ranch hands. Just you against an HOA with a habit of lying and a lawyer husband who makes things look real official." I didn't answer right away. He was right. That was exactly what Marla believed. "You're not from around here," Ray continued softly. "And when folks don't know you, they think you can be pushed. What they don't know is your uncle was tougher than the granite under this mountain. You got some of that in you." I walked back to the desk, ran a hand along the brittle corners of old water reports. "He kept this lake clean, Ray. Cleaner than any lake in 3 counties. He spent his money, his time, his damn health, making sure it stayed that way." "And now someone else wants to claim it," Ray said. I closed the file. "Except they don't give a damn about the lake. They want the land value." He nodded grimly. "And they think threatening you with fake federal claims will scare you off like the others." "It won't," I said. He eyed me carefully. "Ethan, what's in that case of yours?" I didn't answer at first. Instead, I reached for my phone, waking the screen. A single encrypted app icon glowed at the center, its symbol nothing more than a black square. Ray's eyebrows lifted. "Well, that ain't a regular contacts list." "No," I said. "It isn't." "Who you callin'? Someone who's waited for a setup like this." Ray looked out the window again, expression tightening. "You sure they're ready for what you're about to stir up?" "I'm sure." He nodded slowly. "Then do it, before they get bolder." The cabin creaked as the wind shifted, pushing cool air through the vents. The lake lapped rhythmically against the posts outside, steady and patient. I pressed the encrypted icon. A secure call screen opened. It rang once, twice, then connected. A voice answered, crisp and professional. Caldwell? It's time, I said. Static hummed for a moment. Understood. Sending the field signal. The call disconnected without another word. Ray blinked. Well, that was quick. They've been waiting, I said quietly. For Marla? He asked. No, I replied. For people like her. Ray nodded, understanding what I meant even if I didn't spell it out. Then I reckon tomorrow's gonna be a long day. I walked to the porch with him. The boards groaned under our weight. A cold breeze swept off the lake, carrying the dark scent of wet earth and pine needles. Far across the water, a single light flicked on at one of the vacant cabins, one of the properties the HOA had taken from its owner. Ray spat to the side. Can't believe they turned those folks out. We'll get it back, I said. He shook his head. She's gonna push harder now. When a con gets challenged, they double down. I know. And she ain't scared of the sheriff, he added. Not with her husband forging papers. I know. Ray paused on the last step before walking into the dark. Just be ready, Ethan. They're not done. I'm counting on it. He nodded once and walked down the path until the night swallowed him whole. I stood there a long moment, watching the lake until the fog settled thick as wool. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled, low, mournful, echoing through the trees like a warning. Inside the cabin, the encrypted app blinked once. A message flashed. Field unit on approach. Dawn. I exhaled. Quiet time was over. Tomorrow, the storm would break, and Marla Kensington had no idea how hard it would hit. Dawn rose sharp and cold, the kind of Montana morning where breath hangs in the air a moment too long. Mist clung to the lake like cotton, rolling low over the water and spilling onto the shore. Pine needles glistened under a thin coat of dew. Everything felt still, suspended, like nature itself was holding its breath for what was about to happen. I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of hot coffee, its steam twisting upward in lazy curls. A quiet hum buzzed in my chest, the kind that comes before impact, right before something big shifts. I listened to the wind brushing through the trees, waiting. The encrypted message had promised dawn, and dawn was here. But the first sound wasn't rotor blades. It was engines, multiple engines. I walked to the edge of the porch, gripping the railing as the first SUV rolled into view down my access road. Dust plumed behind it, glowing gold in the early light. Then a second SUV appeared. Then a third. All white, all identical, all wrong. Ray emerged from the trees, breath puffing out in short bursts. "Ethan!" he hissed, pointing toward the road. "They're back, and they brought more this time." No sooner had he said it than the convoy stopped abruptly, doors opening in sharp, practiced unison. Men and women poured out, fake uniforms, plastic badges, clipboards, measuring tools. Marla stood in front of them proudly in a crisp gray suit, arms crossed like she was leading a federal strike team. "Mr. Caldwell!" she yelled, voice slicing through the morning calm. "This property is now under emergency environmental investigation. Step away from the shoreline immediately." Ray's jaw clenched. Lord Almighty, she's staging her own raid. I set down my coffee on the railing. Let her. Marla's agents rushed toward the lake, unspooling bright red hazard tape around my dock, cabin steps, and the old pine shed. They erected portable cones, snapped on blue nitrile gloves, and placed plastic sample jars across my yard as if they were prepping for a televised crime scene. One man in a neon vest called out, "Zone 1 marked! Beginning contamination sweep!" Another responded, "Reserve team, check for illegal water manipulation." Ray muttered, "They're reading off a script." Marla marched down the slope toward my dock with her chin lifted high. "Mr. Caldwell, your refusal to vacate during an active environmental seizure is a federal offense. You are now in violation of TSUP." I cut in. You don't have the authority to seize a lemonade stand, Marla. Her nostrils flared. You think this is a game? Ray whispered. She's about to blow. Marla snapped her fingers sharply. Special Response Unit. The black pickup truck at the end of the convoy rolled forward. 2 men hopped out wearing imitation hazmat suits, thin plastic material that crinkled loudly in the chilly air. They carried sampling rods and soil scoops. Secure the dock, Marla demanded. They stomped across my property and tried to box in my dock with hazard tape. One clipped the tape to my boat cleat. Another stuck a sign in the grass. Federal seizure, active zone. It leaned crookedly to the left. I took a slow breath. Marla, this is illegal. No, she snapped. What you're doing is illegal, and the federal authorities will agree once they arrive. Ray squinted. Federal authorities? That's right, she replied triumphantly. We filed an emergency contamination report overnight. Real agents will be here any minute. The hair on Ray's arm stood straight. Ethan, she's trying to bait the real feds with fake evidence. I nodded slowly. That's exactly what she's doing. One of the hazmat fakes jabbed a metal rod into the dirt near my dock. The rod sank too easily. It wasn't a probe. It was hollow. He bent down, pretending to check the soil sample, except I saw his hand slide a tiny baggie, something dark, something damp, into the hole before placing a jar over it. He wasn't collecting contamination. He was planting it. Ray saw it too. Did you see? I saw, I said. Marla turned to me, smug satisfaction dripping from every word. By the time the federal team tests our findings, they'll confirm what we already know. This lake is compromised, and you are responsible. I stepped onto the dock deliberately, letting the boards groan beneath my boots. The fog parted just enough to reveal still water, black and glassy. Then I heard it. A rumble, not from the forest, not from the road, from the sky. Ray looked up. That ain't her people. No, it wasn't. The distant thup-thup-thup of rotor blades split open the morning silence, growing louder, stronger, closer. The fog above the lake trembled as a dark shape descended through it. A helicopter. Not white, not branded. Federal matte black. Marla froze mid-step, her voice caught in her throat. Her volunteers looked up, shading their eyes. Ray whispered, Well, looks like your call came through. The helicopter hovered over the water, sending ripples racing across the lake's surface. Wind blasted through the trees, whipping hazard tape into a frenzy, snapping signs flat against the ground. The skids touched down on my dock. A woman stepped out, boots first, then long dark coat, badge clipped to her belt. Her presence carried weight, quiet but undeniable. Agent Naomi Parker, Environmental Crimes Unit. She surveyed the scene with a steady gaze, taking in the fake hazmat suits, the cones, the plastic badges, the crooked signs, and finally Marla, who stood stiff as carved granite. Mrs. Kensington? Agent Parker asked, voice low and controlled. Marla opened her mouth. Yes, Agent Parker held up a hand. Please stop talking. Ray coughed into his fist to hide a laugh. Agent Parker turned to me. Mr. Caldwell? I nodded. Agent. She stepped fully onto the dock, boots thudding with absolute authority. I received your alert, she said quietly, and your request for a field evaluation under the new Anti-HOA Act. Marla's face drained of color. Ray whispered, Oh boy, she's done now. Agent Parker surveyed the chaos once more. Mr. Caldwell, what exactly happened here? I looked straight at her, steady as the lake behind me. They staged a fake federal raid on private land, I said, on my lake, and they planted evidence to justify it. Agent Parker's jaw tightened. Marla swallowed hard. I didn't smile, but I did say the words she never expected to hear. Agent Parker, I believe we have an HOA impersonating federal authority. The air went still. Not a breath, not a sound, not even the lake dared move. And Marla finally realized the storm she planned wasn't the storm she was going to face. Agent Naomi Parker stood firmly on my dock, boots planted wide, her badge glinting like cold steel in the morning haze. The lake wind tugged lightly at her coat as she took in the scene. A full mock raid staged by an HOA president who thought props could replace jurisdiction. Her eyes fell on the hazard tape strung between my railing posts, the flimsy cones marking off imaginary seizure zones, the fake hazmat suits crinkling under nervous volunteers shifting their weight. Then she looked at me. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I'll need a clear rundown of what was staged here." Before I could answer, Marla stormed forward, waving a clipboard like it granted her authority. "Excuse me, you can't just—" Agent Parker didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Ma'am, I told you not to talk." The calm, flat tone cut through the air like a blade. A murmur rippled through Marla's volunteers. Even Thomas stiffened where he stood near the SUVs, hands hovering awkwardly at his briefcase as though he could hide behind it. I stepped forward. "Agent, they planted soil samples, brought in fake inspectors, declared my property a protected sanctuary without any EPA filing, and staged a federal raid to push me off the lake." Ray added from behind me, "They even taped off his cabin like it's a crime scene. Only crime here is the paperwork they printed off a broken office printer." A tiny crack of a smile appeared at the edge of Agent Parker's mouth, just for a second. She turned toward Marla. "Mrs. Kensington, I need to see your credentials." Marla lifted her chin. "We operate under Provisional Environmental Authority." "What authority?" Agent Parker asked calmly. "The HOA's Environmental Subcommittee," Marla answered. Agent Parker blinked once, twice. Then she exhaled sharply. "That's not a federal entity." "It's federally aligned," Marla insisted. "No," Agent Parker said. "It isn't." Thomas stepped in. "Agent Parker, if we could review the formal complaint Mr. Caldwell submitted—" "I wasn't speaking to you, Mr. Kensington," she said, without turning her head. "I'll get to you shortly." Ray elbowed me gently. "I like her." Fog rolled across the lake, brushing past us in low tendrils. It made the whole scene feel like a stage, the kind where truth had better lighting than lies. Agent Parker motioned toward the hazmat team. "You three, off the dock, now." The volunteers froze. "I said now." They scrambled backward, practically tripping over cones and equipment. Marla folded her arms tightly. "You have no authority to undo a federal seizure site." Agent Parker squared her shoulders and finally spoke the words that tightened every muscle in Marla's jaw. "Mrs. Kensington, this is not a federal seizure site, because your organization is not federal. You impersonated an environmental authority. That's a felony." Gasps ripple through the fake crew like wind touching tall grass. Then Agent Parker added, "And you attempted it on private property, owned by Senator Ethan Caldwell." Silence hit the shoreline like thunder. Ray's head snapped toward me so fast his hat nearly flew off. Marla's face went white. Thomas's mouth fell open, a soundless "oh" hanging uselessly in the air. One of the volunteers whispered, "Senator?" Agent Parker glanced at me. "Would you like to explain your role, Senator?" I nodded slowly and stepped forward. My voice stayed low, steady as the lake behind me. "I served on the Environmental Oversight Committee for 8 years. My uncle left this lake to me, along with every certified water report, every restoration log, and every ownership document going back 50 years. I paused. "And 3 weeks ago, I co-authored the Anti-HOA Protection Act, the one that makes federal impersonation an immediate criminal offense." Marla stumbled backward, gripping her clipboard like it was an anchor keeping her from falling. That law, I continued, went into effect 2 days ago. A breeze swept across the dock, carrying the faint smell of pine and morning water. The tension thickened, pressing on all of us. Thomas tried to recover. Senator Caldwell, if we could just discuss the— No, I said. You don't get discussion. You get accountability. Agent Parker stepped between us. Mrs. Kensington, Mr. Kensington, you're both under investigation for falsifying environmental documents, staging federal authority, planting evidence of contamination, and threatening residents into unlawful land sales. Marla sputtered. This is a misunderstanding. It isn't, Parker snapped. Your documents are forgeries. Your maps are illegal modifications of federal property surveys, and your planted evidence is a felony. Ray leaned toward me. You just dropped a mountain on their heads. I didn't answer. I just watched the panic drain into their faces, watched the show crumble the moment a real authority stepped into their flimsy theater. Marla finally composed herself, barely. You can't do this. We have influence. No, Agent Parker said. You have charges. The wind picked up, rattling the fake barricades and sending hazard tape flapping like torn flags of a fallen kingdom. I will need to see all related paperwork, Agent Parker finished. Every forged seal, every fabricated rule, every sample you tampered with. Now. Thomas swallowed hard. I need to retrieve our materials from the vehicle. No, Parker replied. Stay where you are. You're not tampering with anything else today. Marla's voice cracked. You can't treat us like criminals. You impersonated federal agents, Parker said. You are criminals. Behind us, a strange calm settled over the lake. Quiet, steady, waiting. Ray whispered, Well, Ethan, they gonna double down or they gonna crumble? I watched Marla's trembling hands and Thomas's defeated stare. They're already crumbling, I said. But they don't know how far they're about to fall. Because the real storm hadn't hit yet. The real storm was just arriving on the horizon. The sun had finally burned off the last of the morning fog, revealing a scene that looked less like an environmental investigation and more like a low-budget movie set collapsing under the weight of real law. Hazard tape flapped wildly in the breeze. The fake hazmat suits rustled as volunteers shuffled nervously, unsure whether to stand still or flee. Agent Parker moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, the gravel crunching under her boots as she approached each prop and forged tool like a surgeon inspecting counterfeits on an operating table. Every time she lifted a document or tapped an instrument, her expression hardened further. She pointed to one of the volunteers. You, what federal agency trained you? The young man gulped. Crystal Preserve Environmental Analysis Division? There's no such division, Parker replied. He stared at the ground. I didn't know that. Ray chuckled behind me. Bet he didn't know half the stuff they shoved in those binders either. Thomas Kensington, visibly sweating now, tried to step forward. Agent Parker, perhaps we can clear up some of the confusion. Parker raised her badge inches from his face. Mr. Kensington, the only confusion is yours. You committed federal impersonation in full view of witnesses. You forged seals belonging to agencies you don't understand. And worst of all, you tampered with evidence for a crime that doesn't exist. I watched Thomas's confidence drain like water through sand. Next, Parker knelt at the spot where the fake hazmat worker had buried the planted evidence. She dug into the dirt with a gloved hand and lifted the small baggie between 2 fingers. State-certified hazmat operators don't use grocery store freezer bags, she said flatly. One of the volunteers turned away, rubbing his temples. I can't believe I listened to her. The lake wind picked up, carrying pine needles across the ground and tugging Marla's blazer sideways. She stood rigid behind her sunglasses, her jaw clenching so hard A muscle twitched along her cheek. "This is all a mistake," she argued. "We were trying to protect the habitat." "By impersonating federal officers?" Parker asked. Marla stuttered. "By enforcing federal statutes." "Which ones?" Parker interrupted. "Well, there's the—" "Name one," Parker said, voice sharp as a blade. Silence. The water lapped gently at the dock, as though waiting for the blow that everyone in the clearing knew was coming. Parker opened a clear evidence pouch and sealed the planted sample inside. Tampering with federal environmental samples is a felony, and presenting them to force property sales? That's conspiracy to commit fraud. Ray let out a low whistle. "They're digging a hole they ain't crawling out of." As Parker moved toward the row of forged documents, a sudden burst of static crackled through her radio. She lifted it to her mouth. "Go for Parker," a voice answered. "Unit 3 here. We've reviewed the preliminary evidence you transmitted. The documents match multiple cases of forged environmental claims submitted by Crystal Preserve Holdings. We're en route." Parker nodded, then slipped the radio back onto her belt. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, turning to me, "you weren't the first target." "I know," I answered quietly. "The Hendersons, the Matsons, the Caldwells." Ray muttered, "And who knows how many more." Parker approached the largest binder, Marla's prized Federal Environmental Compliance Manual, and flipped it open. Her eyes moved line by line. "This seal is fake," she said. "This signature belongs to a retired forestry officer. This letterhead hasn't been used since 1998. And this statute, Federal Water Protection Code 12B, does not exist." Every exposed lie was another nail in the coffin Marla had built herself. Then Parker lifted a sheet of paper and held it to the light. "And here we are," she murmured, "the smoking gun." Ray frowned. "What is it?" Parker handed it to me. It was a purchase agreement. A real one. Signed by Thomas. Stamped by Crystal Preserve Holdings, offering to buy my property for barely 40% of its value after confirmed environmental violations. Ray spat at the dirt. They had the sale contract ready before the fake raid even started. Parker faced the Kensingtons. "So, you were planning to stage an emergency, force him off his land, and swoop in for a discounted acquisition. Again." Thomas tried to speak. "We were misinformed." "You forged the documents yourself," Parker snapped. "Your name is right here. Your handwriting, your signature, your fraudulent seals." Marla finally broke. "This is political," she shouted, pointing at me. "He's manipulating the federal agents. He's lying. He's—" Parker turned sharply. "Mrs. Kensington, you are one sentence away from obstructing a federal investigation." The wind seemed to pause. Marla's mouth clamped shut. She trembled. Not from fear, but from realizing she'd lost control. Thomas, meanwhile, had gone still and pale, as if wishing he could vanish into the pine shadows behind him. "Agent Parker," I said, "you haven't asked me the important question yet." She studied my face. "And what question is that?" "Why I had the authority to request a full Environmental Crimes Unit investigation on short notice." A slow understanding dawned behind her eyes. "I think I already know," she said. Ray nudged me gently. "Go on, Ethan, show 'em." I opened my briefcase, removed the leather folder, and handed Parker the top sheet. Her eyebrows rose. "Senator Caldwell," she read aloud, "primary author of the Anti-HOA Protection Act." Ray grinned. "Now that's what I call paperwork with teeth." The volunteers stared at me like they were seeing a ghost. Thomas seemed to collapse inward. And Marla looked like she'd swallowed ice. Parker slipped the paper back into the folder. "I see. That explains the urgency." "It does," I said. "The law was written specifically for operations like this." Parker addressed the Kensingtons one final time. Your fake raid has now escalated into federal felony territory, and you're going to answer for every forged seal, every fraudulent claim, and every family you intimidated. Marla took a step back. You can't arrest us. You don't have proof. Parker nodded toward the incoming sound of engines. Real engines, heavy, coordinated. Proof is arriving right now. Because through the tree line came the unmistakable sight of government SUVs, dark, armored, and carrying the agents who would close this case once and for all. The storm had finally arrived, and this time, it wasn't staged. The first of the real federal SUVs rolled into view with the steady confidence of men and women who understood the weight of their badges. Their engines rumbled through the clearing, sending vibrations through the dry pine needles scattered across the ground. 3 vehicles, then a fourth, followed by a dark van with tinted windows that reflected the rising sun like a cold mirror. Ray whispered, "Well, that's the cavalry." I watched Marla's fake team scatter like frightened birds, stepping away from the dock, peeling off their flimsy vests, trying to look like innocent bystanders instead of props in a failed con. But it was too late. Their fingerprints were on every stake, every sample, every forged seal. Agent Parker stood firm at the dock's edge as the first vehicle door swung open. A tall man in a charcoal gray tactical jacket stepped out, adjusting his radio. His badge read, Rodriguez, Federal Environmental Response Division. He surveyed the scene with one sweeping look, the hazard tape flapping in the breeze, the fake equipment, the forged documents, the crooked signs, the defeated expressions of Marla and Thomas. "Agent Parker," he said, voice steady, "your transmission was accurate. This is textbook impersonation." He turned to me. "Senator Caldwell." I nodded. "Agent Rodriguez." Rodriguez turned to his team. "Secure all fraudulent materials. Document everything. Collect every fabricated seal and sample." A flurry of movement followed. Federal hands, real hands, gloved hands, lifting, tagging, photographing, measuring. The fake evidence got bagged and labeled. The forged papers were scanned and compared against federal databases. The fake hazmat suits were hung on portable racks like sad costumes after a school play. And Marla watched it all unravel in real time. "This is a violation of my rights," she snapped. "We had authority." Rodriguez held up a hand. "Ma'am, the only thing you had was a clipboard and a costume." Ray snorted so loudly, I had to step forward to hide my laugh. Rodriguez opened the folder Parker had handed him earlier, eyes scanning the purchase agreement. "Attempted property acquisition under false federal authority," he said quietly. "This matches 3 open cases under Crystal Preserve Holdings." Thomas shifted nervously. "Those were misunderstandings." Rodriguez didn't look up. "You coerced families into selling their properties at depressed prices. That's fraud, conspiracy, impersonation of federal officers, and attempted land seizure." Ray muttered, "He forgot extortion." Rodriguez closed the folder with a soft, final thud. "Mrs. Kensington, Mr. Kensington, please step forward." Marla lifted her chin. "Are we under arrest?" "No," Rodriguez said calmly. "Not yet." A flicker of hope crossed her face. Rodriguez finished. "But you will be in about 60 seconds." Her face collapsed into shock. Rodriguez signaled 2 agents forward. "We're waiting for one more confirmation before we formalize the charges." "What confirmation?" Marla asked. He turned to me. "Senator, you have the documents?" I opened my briefcase, slow, deliberate, and pulled out the restored water quality records, the certified environmental assessments, the ownership documentation, the historical files my uncle preserved, every single page stamped and verified signed by agencies the Kensingtons never bothered to fool because they never thought someone would check. I handed the stack to Rodriguez. "These reports," I said, Show the lake meets or exceeds all federal purity standards. No contamination. No sanctuary designation. No endangered species. No federal involvement. And absolutely no justification for seizure. Rodriguez flipped through several pages. His brow softened. Clean. All clean. He looked up. Then the contamination they reported. Planted, I said. We saw them bury it. Parker added, and we retrieved the baggie from the soil. It matches no local sediment composition. Rodriguez gave a single nod. That was all it took. 2 agents stepped forward. Mrs. Kensington, Mr. Kensington, one said, please turn around and place your hands behind your back. Marla staggered backward. No, this is a mistake. This is political. This is, the agent repeated, hands behind your back. Thomas tried to bolt, pivoting toward the tree line, but the move was slow, hesitant, full of guilt more than intention. He didn't make it 2 steps before an agent blocked his path with a calm, don't. He froze. His briefcase slipped from his hand, hitting the dirt with a dull thud. Marla trembled violently as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. She whipped her head toward me. You think this makes you a hero? She shouted. You think this lake is safe now? You don't understand what you're dealing with. Rodriguez cut her off. Ma'am, the only thing unsafe here was your operation. She shook her head, eyes wild. We had reason. We had higher backing. From who? Rodriguez asked. She hesitated, and for the first time since she stormed onto my dock days ago, she looked genuinely afraid. Thomas was cuffed next, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the truth he could no longer outrun. The fake inspectors stood off to the side, some crying, some pale, all realizing they'd been pawns in a game played by people who never intended to protect anything but their profits. Rodriguez turned back to me. Senator Caldwell, we'll need copies of all documents for the federal case file. Of course. He nodded toward Ray. And you, sir, will need to give a witness statement. Ray tapped his hat. Be happy to. Been wanting to tell somebody about these 2 for a long time. As the agents read the formal charges aloud, the wind shifted, pushing the last scraps of hazard tape into the lake. It floated for a moment before sinking beneath the surface, disappearing into the clean, dark water below. It was symbolic, fitting. Fabrication sinking, truth rising, justice settling. Rodriguez turned toward me once more. Senator, I'm going to recommend restitution for the families who were forced to sell, and full dissolution of Crystal Preserve Holdings. I nodded. They deserve their land back. Thanks to you, he said. They'll get it. Across the clearing, Marla and Thomas were guided toward the federal SUVs. No more swagger, no more power, no more staged authority. Only silence, broken occasionally by the crunch of gravel under heavy boots. Ray exhaled long and slow. Well, Ethan, reckon that's the end of 'em. I watched the agents close the SUV doors. Not quite, I thought. This was only the beginning of holding them accountable. But it was the end of the fear they'd spread, the end of the fraud they'd run, and the beginning of justice for every family on this lake. 6 months passed like the changing of seasons, quiet, deliberate, unavoidable. Winter snow thawed off the ridgelines, trickling down into the basin-fed streams that fed Clearwater Lake. Spring winds brushed the water into gentle ripples. New pine shoots rose from the soil where hazard stakes once stood, reclaiming ground that had been scarred by lies. The lake looked the same as ever, still, clean, impossibly bright under the wide Montana sky. But everything else had changed. The HOA was gone. Crystal Preserve Holdings was dissolved, and the families who had been forced out under fear and fraudulent fines had begun to return. I stood on the dock one cool morning in early summer, the boards warm under my bare feet. The sun hung low, sending gold shards across the glassy surface. Ray walked beside me, slower these days, leaning on the railing as he watched the lake like he always had, as if it were an old friend waking up. "You hear about the Hendersons?" he asked. I nodded. "They got their deed back last week. Good folks. They never should have been run off. And the Matsons got restitution," I added. "Full value plus damages." Ray's smile creased the edges of his weathered face. "Your law did that." "It wasn't just the law," I said quietly. "People finally paid attention." Ray tapped the dock post. "Well, folks tend to listen when a senator calls in the FBI." The breeze shifted, carrying the soft scent of wildflowers and cedar. I pulled out the letter that had arrived just days earlier, one last loose thread tied neatly in place. A note from the county judge. "The court hereby affirms that Clearwater Lake, its surrounding acreage, and all associated water rights belong solely to Senator Ethan Caldwell. No restrictions, claims, or easements shall apply." Ray squinted at the embossed seal. "Your uncle would be proud." I looked across the water toward the opposite shore where a once-abandoned cabin now had its windows open, curtains flapping lazily in the breeze. The Caldwells had moved back in 2 days ago. Children's laughter echoed faintly across the water. "He'd want the lake to stay free," I said, "not to become someone's game board." Ray grunted. "Well, it ain't anymore. You made sure of that." Behind us, a pair of eagles soared over the tree line. Their shadows stretched across the lake like quiet guardians. A soft crunch of gravel pulled our attention to the access road. A county vehicle rolled up, Sheriff Harlan stepping out, hat tucked under his arm. He walked toward us, boots thudding softly on the old dock. "Mornin', Ethan." "Ray," he said. "Got some news from state headquarters." "Good or bad?" Ray asked. "Good," Harlan said, leaning his elbows against the railing. "State Environmental Office certified the lake as one of the cleanest in Montana. They're using your uncle's restoration records for training now." Ray chuckled. "Never thought I'd see the day government folks studied something that was solved in 1954. Harlan shook his head. "Well, folks are learning, and they should. This place is special." He handed me a crisp folder stamped with the EPA seal. "Federal recognition of your lake's ecological value, and confirmation that the contamination planted by the HOA didn't match anything native to the region." "Finally official," I murmured. "Long overdue," Harlan replied. He lingered for a moment, then sighed. "You know, you stopped something bigger than just fraud. This kind of thing could have spread farther if you hadn't acted." I didn't answer. My gaze drifted back to the lake. The wind changed direction, bringing with it the scent of open water and pine resin. The surface shimmered faintly, like the lake itself was whispering gratitude in its own language. After Harlan left, Ray and I continued along the dock. Halfway across, he paused and stared out into the distance. "You ever think," he said quietly, "that maybe this lake saved itself through you?" I looked at the water as sunlight caught it just right, dancing along its surface. Maybe he was right. Maybe some places are too pure to be stolen. Maybe some land carries the memory of the hands that shaped it and refuses to let deceit take root. "Maybe," I whispered. Silence passed between us, a soft, peaceful kind of silence that felt earned after so much noise. Then Ray nudged my arm. "So, Senator, what's next?" I smiled, shaking my head. "Hopefully, a quiet month." He barked a laugh. "With your luck, not a chance." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. An email. Subject: Urgent. HOA president attempted to seize a veteran's Purple Heart ceremony. Location: Wyoming. Requesting guidance under the Anti-HOA Protection Act. Ray caught the look on my face. "Trouble?" "Seems like someone needs help," I said. He chuckled. "And I reckon you're gonna give it." I folded the phone shut and looked across the lake one last time. The water lay perfectly still, reflecting the light like a promise. HOA bullies, I murmured, only have the power you let them have. Ray clapped my shoulder. Then go take that power back. I nodded, breathing in the crisp morning air. This lake, my lake, was safe now, and as long as I drew breath, so would every other family facing the same injustice. The lake rippled gently, as if agreeing. Justice had settled here, and it was ready to keep moving. I turned from the dock, boots echoing on the wood, knowing full well this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of the next fight. If you've ever stood your ground for what's yours, drop a simple yes in the comments so folks know they're not alone out here. And if you believe justice still means something in this country, hit that subscribe button and stick around. We've got more stories coming.